Hello everyone, I'm Greg and welcome back to my channel, Midnight Oil Software. In this video I want to talk about refactoring existing code that you've kind of let get a little out of hand, let it get a little bit sloppy, and refactoring it by breaking classes down into smaller classes, kind of applying the single responsibility pattern, just to make your code a little bit cleaner, easier to maintain, and much more extensible. So for that example, I'm going to show you where I was trying to add multiple cameras to my game. Well, actually, my game already has multiple cameras. And what I wanted to be able to do, though, was allow the user to switch between these cameras manually. And it's actually allowed me to do it so that I could create a cinematic trailer for the game. And when I started looking at the code I had in place for managing the cameras, I realized I had a lot of duplicated code, copy-pasted code, and code that was really being implemented in a class where it didn't belong. And so that's a prime example of something that could be refactored out into a smaller class. So I'll show you what I mean. I'll switch over to Unity, and I'll show you in my game I've got a cockpit camera where the camera is positioned in the interior of the cockpit on the player's ship. And this is the default camera when you're playing the game. The player can also toggle, if they want, to a follow camera that follows behind the player ship. And then there's a couple other cameras that the player cannot manually switch to, but that will be selected during different game states. For instance, this explosion cam will show the player's ship being destroyed to give you sort of a more cinematic feel of that moment when the player ship is destroyed. It shows it being blown up from a distance. But I wanted to be able to switch to these two cameras manually in the game so I could start working on a trailer for the game. And the way I implemented the code, it's ugly to do that. So I'll show you an example. I've got all these serialized fields in this class. This is a scenario manager class. And really this class, it didn't really make sense to be switching between cameras in this class. And so I've got these serialized fields that I really don't need in here because I should be moving this functionality out of here. And then in the update method, if the user presses 2 or the user presses 1, I'm switching between the follow camera and the cockpit camera. And you can see I've got a separate method to enable the follow camera and another one to enable the cockpit camera. And if I call true on one, I got to call false on the other. I mean, it's already looking ugly, right? Add to that I have two other methods for the explosion camera and the transport camera, and there's just a lot of duplicated code inside of these functions. And then when the scenario starts up, in this setup scenario method here, I'm calling all 4 of those methods either with a true or a false value, and that's just not clean. That's very sloppy, and this happens to all of us. We get a little lazy. We're in creative mode. We're adding feature, and we just want to get code in there really quickly, and we'll do something sloppy like this. But then when we want to go and we want to extend it, well, that's when we start to see how messy it really is. And this is a perfect time to refactor your code. And so another thing I might want to do is I might want to add another camera. You know, I might want to come in here. I might want to go to Cinemachine and say create virtual camera, call this thing fixed camera, and maybe I want it to follow that transport ship, the capital ship, but I want it to look at the player ship. And I'll go ahead and position it in a way that I think would look kind of cinematic. So I get this camera set up. And that's really cool, and I might want to switch to this camera manually. So now, if we go back and look at our script, I'm going to have to add another serialized field. I'm going to have to add that fixed camera. So I'm going to have 5 camera serialized fields here. I'm going to have to add another else if and another function enable fixed camera. Well, you get the picture. This is starting to look really, really ugly. So how would I refactor that? Well, to start with, let's create something, a camera manager. So I'm going to create an empty game object. And by the way, I do that by right-clicking here under the hierarchy. So I right-clicked, create empty game object. I'm going to rename it to camera manager. And we're going to want a script for that. So down here under assets, scripts, I right click in here and I say create C# script. And I'm going to rename it to camera manager. And let's drag that to our camera manager object. Okay, so we drag that script up there. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. You don't need to look at my face. So if we go and edit that script, the first thing we're going to want to do is add serialized field. And I'm going to add a list of game objects. And these are going to be our cameras. And if we go back into Unity, you'll see that we now have this collection of cameras. And it's cool in Unity, I can just grab a camera and just drag it right into that collection. I can grab my followed camera, grab our transport camera, grab our explosion camera. I can even grab that fixed camera. And so I've got all 5 cameras in the collection. So I don't need 5 different serialized fields, one for each camera. We go back into our script, and we can add a public method, and we'll call it activate camera, or we'll call it switch to camera. That probably sounds a little more. And it's going to take a camera. So now, and if we wanted to get fancy, I could add an enumeration, and I know the order that I put these cameras in. I could have an enumeration, and I could distinguish between, in fact, I'll go ahead and do that. Public enum virtual cameras. And we'll start, the first one we'll call it cockpit. Follow, transport, explosion, fixed. And I don't think that's how you spell cockpit. All right, and I'll go ahead and make sure that's an int, even though I'm pretty sure under the covers it's going to be an int. So in here, we'll take one of those. And I'm going to loop through all of our cameras. I don't need to cast that. I is less than cameras.count. And I'm going to set a Boolean in here. I'm going to call it enable. And it's going to be true if I equals cam. All right, so if the value that was passed in matches the element that we're on, enable will be true, otherwise it's going to be false. And so then we can grab our camera at that index, set active, enable. And you may remember in the ugly code in our scenario manager, in our enable camera methods, I was grabbing the audio listener off of the camera and then either enabling it or disabling it. So we're going to want to do that in here too. So audio listener equals, and we want this to be inside of our for loop. listener dot enabled equals enable. And actually what I might want to do, see if I can do this. Well, no, it won't let me do that. Because if it's null, that would be a null reference exception. So I'll go ahead and check it for null. Okay, and then the other thing we wanted to do, I didn't really explain this, but in our other code, in our scenario manager, I was setting this match rotation. So I have a component called match rotation, which takes a target, which is a transform, and it will match the rotation of the background camera. That's why I have it assigned as a background camera. So the reason I did this is I've got this 3D skybox, and I have the sun, and I have a planet, and I want those to be rotated based on the rotation of the camera, which in most cases is going to be the cockpit or the follow camera of the player ship. And it looks really wonky if that's not rotated the same as the active camera. So what I do is I grab that match rotation off of the background camera, and then I set its target to be whatever the current camera's transform is. So in here, I'm going to add a serialized field, and I'm going to call it match rotation. If I can type again. And we're going to assign that in the inspector. And we're going to call set target and that should do that. So let's go back into Unity, and we're going to need to add our match rotation, and it is on our background camera. Oops, I just lost our, there we go. Boom. We have our method to switch to the camera, but we want to, in update, check to see if we press the numbers 1 through 5, and then select the corresponding camera based on what number we press. So to do that, I'm going to loop from 0 through our number of cameras. And if input.get key down key code alpha 1 plus I. So if we pressed 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, we're going to call switch to camera, and we're going to pass it virtual cameras Okay. And then in our start method, actually in our awake method, we're going to call switch to camera virtual cameras cockpit. All right. And now we can start cleaning up some code. We don't need these anymore. I don't even need that anymore. We don't need any of these. So, okay, I was playing around with this for a while to figure out what the writer command is to do a block comment. I'm just going to delete these functions, and I'm going to refactor to fix my compiler errors. So let's go and see what we've got here. So if we pause again, I don't need any of this anymore because this is where I was choosing the different cameras based on the keystroke. Now this does remind me that I want to check to see if the game is paused. So let me come in here and say if pause manager.game paused. If we're not paused, or we are paused, just return. There. Okay, so what else do we got here? So when we are defeated, we want to enable the transport camera. So I'm going to add a camera manager reference to our game. I'm going to have to add a function to disable a particular camera. All right, so we will implement that later. Player death. We're going to enable the explosion camera. And what other compiler error do I have here? Respawn player. I was saving the active camera. For now, I'm just always going to respawn the cockpit camera just for the sake of brevity on this video. Okay, so have I fixed all my compiler errors? Yeah, I want to actually specify the camera I'm disabling here. And I think I might have one more. Yes. Alright, so it looks like all those compiler errors are fixed. If I go back into Unity, go up to my scenario manager, I need to add a camera manager. Okay, so for the moment of truth, let's start the game. And it correctly started me on the cockpit camera, but I can see that my match rotation is not working. I'm going to have to fix that. So this is what I meant by the rotation looks wonky if that match rotation script is not right. But let's try and switch cameras. There's the follow camera. There's the transport camera. There's our explosion camera, and there's our fixed camera. I really wanted to see how that one looked. Ooh, I think that looks kind of cool. So I'm just flying around, watching that ship fly from that fixed camera position. And I can see the other ships flying around from there too. That's kind of like a movie, isn't it? So anyhow, this video is getting really long, so I think I want to go ahead and stop it from there. But I want to thank you for tuning into my channel, and I hope this has been helpful. I hope you learned a little bit about how you can refactor a large class that's getting a little out of hand and refactoring it down into smaller classes and trying to apply the single responsibility pattern. I hope you learned a little bit about Cinemachine and virtual cameras, even though we didn't go to it in any great detail. But if you found this helpful, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. And if there's any topic in particular you'd like to see covered, post it in the comments. And also, if you have any other suggestions or comments, I look forward to hearing them. Thank you, and I hope to see you in the next video.